We left off in evaluation of diagnostic tests. Okay. You have seen this table, this contingency table. Okay. Um, how do you actually remember the formulas and stuff? If you're having, I used to always get confused and stuff like this, right? So first of all, remember the purpose of all these tests. Okay. We're trying to statistically prove that, like, whatever this diagnostic test that we're in doing on this patient is effective or not. Okay, that's the first thing. All right. Second thing is, all these principles give us a dimension of um, what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so when we look at sensitivity or specificity or PPV or NPV, right? They're looking through a certain lens. Okay, and there are problems in just looking through one lens. You have to look at multiple lenses to make sure you actually have a accurate disease. Okay, so sensitivity, all right, specificity. So what lens are we looking at? We're looking at if the disease is positive, we're looking at through that lens. Okay, in specificity, what lens are we looking at? We're looking at the negative, if the person does not have a disease. Okay, that's the lens we're looking at. Okay, PPV, what's the lens we're looking at? We're looking at if the test is positive. All right, if it's positive, that is PPV. NPV is if the test is negative. All right, remember that. So you come back here. All right, and I've tried to break this down into the easiest parts. Okay, first of all, to get any sort of comparison, you would have to make proportions. Okay, so now we know the lens we're looking at. All right, to get the proportion and make comparisons between those proportions, um, we need a numerator and a denominator. Okay, so in the case of sensitivity, we're looking through the disease positive lens. All right, so what am I actually measuring? I'm measuring the true positives, all right, that are right here. And what are true positives? They have the disease and they tested positive, right? True positives, all right. And that's my numerator, and my denominator will be total disease positive, right? Total disease positive. So this means I have total positives and I have false negatives, right? Who are false negatives? I have identified them as a negative, but they actually are false, and thus they have the disease, right? So TP by FN plus FN, right? If you always get confused between where is FN, where is FP, what is actually a false negative, false positive, stuff like that, just remember this numerator I've shown you, this proportion I've shown you here. True positive by total disease positive, right? If someone has a disease, the test can screw itself up, right? It can give me 95% of the time it's positive, and that 5% of the time it just misidentifies a positive person as a negative person, right? That's its drawback, right? So that is sensitivity. Best way to imagine it is, you know how you go fishing, like deep sea fishing and stuff like that, out like shore fishing, you have like a huge net, right? And you're catching a lot of fishes. That is what sensitivity is. It's a huge net. Okay. Specificity, now I'm looking at through the disease negative lens. Okay, so what's my proportion going to be? True negative, right? True negative right here, and the total disease negative, right? So specificity is true negative by total disease negative, right? So what do you get here? False positives. So they are the people who don't have the disease, but I've told them, you know what, you actually have the disease. After this test, you have the disease. That is false positives. Okay. So now you have specificity. What's the best analogy to understand specificity? Instead of having a huge wide net, I have like I don't know, like a AI which detects all the specific fishes or something, right? Or I have like a specific tool which identifies a camera or something which identifies that particular fish, yellow fish, blue fish, whatever, green fish, right? It helps me to pick, like as the name suggests, it's very specific, and as the name suggests here, it's sensitive. So it's sensitive to a wide net, and this specificity is very specific to some certain something, right? So that's the basic difference between sensitivity and specificity. Okay. Come back here. Just remember these two mnemonics. SN out means highly sensitive. When negative, rules out disease. So this should make sense to you. If the if a test is highly sensitive and it tells you that you don't have the disease, well, you obviously don't, right? Because what are we looking at? We're looking at through the positive lens, right? And if a highly sensitive test tells you you don't have the disease, well, you probably don't. That's a good thing. Okay. What do we do with specificity? We take a highly specific test, all right. Which way are we looking at? We're looking at the lens of negative disease, right? So a highly specific disease, when positive, rules in the disease, and that makes sense as well. So if I have a really specific test and I want to rule in like a very malignant type of tumor or something, right? What do I use in that case? I use like particular antigen markers, right? Particular specific antigen markers, specific genomic sequences or markers or such antibodies or something very specific something, right? To identify, to rule in that disease, right? So that's what a specific disease allows us to do. It allows us to pinpoint exactly what we need, right? That is sensitivity, that is specificity, all right? Now we come at positive predictive value and negative predictive value, okay? So what is positive predictive value? We're looking through the positive test lens, okay? So positive test lens, what are you gonna have? You're gonna have true positives, right? So true positives right here, and what the test has deemed positive, that is the false positive, which makes sense, right? So you have true positive and total test positive. You see the difference in the denominators between all of these, right? Total test positive, right? It'll help you remember that. NPV, true negative and total test negative. So you have true negative and the false negative. The test has deemed this a negative, right? This person doesn't have the disease. That's what the test is saying, right? That is NPV. Okay, come back here. What do you see? Probability that a person who has a positive result actually has the disease. This is also useful, right? If I have a test who has a high PPV, it will let me know that, you know what, you see here, right? So PPV varies directly with pre-test probability, baseline risks such as prevalence. I'll tell you about this. So high pre-test probability is a high PPV, right? So yeah, I'll get to the pre-test probability and stuff. So a high positive predictive value, right, will let me know that all my positives are actually positives. Okay, that is the positive predictive value, and the negative predictive value will let me know that all of my negatives are actually negatives. Okay, and we'll discuss the relationship between PPV and prevalence and stuff. Okay, all right, we'll come back here. So as we know, we know all of these now. Okay, take a look at this. This will help you visualize the table instead of trying to recall what and fumble like what you actually remember. So this is false negative, right? Because you see the negative right here. This is false positive. You see the false positive right here. Okay, and true positive, true negative, you already know, right? So if you remember the concepts, right? These are the concepts. Okay, if you remember the concepts, the rest of the things all make sense. Okay, now the concept with prevalence, right? So prevalence is total disease positive. Okay, disease positive. So what am I looking at? Total disease positive. Okay, divided by total disease positive or total disease negative. So basically the entire population. Okay, so total disease positive by entire population. So the entire table basically. That is prevalence. Okay, and similarly I could have termed it in either way. So total disease positive or total test positive, it's all the same thing. What I'm saying is the entire table. Okay, so you see total disease positive by the total complete. Okay, that is prevalence. All right, now even though we have evaluation tests and diagnostic tests and stuff, right, and we evaluated them using the formulas and stuff, they don't actually determine a person's actual probability of having the disease or not. They just give me a general consensus of the health of a patient, right, or the actual validity of like the test, right? That's all they do. So if I need, so my problem becomes, how do we more concretely determine a single person's risk slash the ability to detect the the disease and stuff, right? So that's the main problem I face, right? So basically, I have my suspicion and it's not confirmed yet, right? So what are the process I have developed in order to reconcile for that the just the basic sensitivity and specificity? I start to make my tests more personalized, right? So what I do is I follow this method. I make a pre-test probability, right? So the probability a person actually has the disease before I even test them, right? And then I compare that pre-test probability after the test has been done with the post-test probability. Okay, this and this will give, if they are differing in values, will help me gauge out what actually is happening. Okay, what my test is actually indicating, right? If the pre-test probability, for example, okay, let's say in a community there is H1N1 or something that's spreading, okay, so the pre-test probability is high, right? A person just comes in for a health checkup and I've already calculated my pre-test probability for this person, right? And after some sort of testing, right, they I see that the post test probability has decreased, right? So the patient is not likely to have the H1N1, maybe due to some genetic mutation or something like that, or because the test was about some genetic marker that can make them susceptible to that. Okay, so using this test, I have now deduced that okay, this person actually does not have that risk. Okay, so I use this model of like for a patient. Okay, and what is this actually called? This is the Bayesian thinking, okay, or the Bayesian model. Because I'm adapting my probabilities, I'm readjusting my probabilities based on new evidence that has come in. What is the new evidence? That is my testing. And what is the probability that I'm changing? Is my pre to post test probability. Okay. All right. As we go further into pre-test, post-test, and likelihood ratios, a basic concept that I want to revise right now is this: the difference between probabilities and odds. Okay, look at the diagram here, right? Odds represent the ratios between parts, okay, and probability indicates the what my desired part is divided by the entire thing, okay. And p plus q, like the probability of p and plus the probability of q, is always going to equal 1. Okay, so the total probabilities are always going to equal 1, but odds may or may not equal 1. They can be greater or they can be lesser than 1, or they can be equal to 1, indicating that they're just 50-50, right? So odds are ratios between parts, and probability is the proportion between the part divided by the whole. Okay, how does this why is this important? Because in a lot of places you will see this exchange happening over and over, is that the odds will be converted into probability and probability will be converted into odds, right? So how do you actually do that? And that's important. Okay, so what you do is, let's say I want to convert odds into probability. Okay, so I take p, if this is my desired outcome, right? This is my desired outcome. I take p as it is in the numerator. Okay, put it up there, right? Now how do I represent p plus q in terms of just p? If the whole is represented by 1, if I just subtract p out of it, I'll get q. Makes sense, right? If the whole is represented by 1, if I subtract p out of it, right, I'll get q, right? So how do I change odds to probability? I take odds is equal to p divided by 1 minus p. Okay, so that's like a general formula. And converting probability to odds, you just exchange it and you put 1 plus p. Okay, you see in this case. So let me just go through it, right? So in this, and what we're gonna keep looking at is this pre-test odds and pre-test post-test odds, pre-test probability, post-test probability. And I do not want you to get confused in this, and I've seen it mentioned in the first aid as well. Okay, I'm not going through it just because of like this the math thing, because I like it. No, pre-test odds is equal to pre-test probability. You see P divided by 1 minus P. Okay, so I'm converting odds into a probability. Okay, so this is how I get it. And then once I have those odds, I can, what I have to do is take the only way to multiply uh, and convert a pre-test probability to a post-test probability is through these intermediates. Okay, I cannot multiply pre-test probability and likelihood ratios. I have to convert it to odds and then into multiply it with ratio and then with probability. And I'll explain what all of this means. I'll explain the intuition. But the main concern right now for us is understanding what, and not actually just trying to remember what the formulas are, understanding what the formulas actually mean. Okay, but if we're converting probability into odds and stuff, right, what we have to do is take the odds, post test odds, this would be P is to Q, right, divided by 1 plus post test odds. So you see 1 minus here and you see 1 plus here, and you can sit there and like derive it if you want, but it's, I mean, this is easier to remember than just like if I gave you the formula as it is. Right now you understand the principle behind it. Okay, so that was odds and probability, and this represents the same thing. Okay, so odds is the ratio of blue balls to yellow balls, which is 4/6, right, which reduces to 2/3. But probability is the ratio of blue balls to the entire thing. So if I gave you a mixed bag of blue balls and yellow balls, I ask you what's the probability of you getting the blue ball, right? It would be 4/10, which is 2/5. But what are the odds? What is the ratio of blue balls to yellow balls? Basically, the odds of blue balls, it's 4/6. Yeah, which is also 2/3. Okay, this is 2/5. This is 2/3. Okay, now you understand that. You can take a look at this and understand better if you want. Right. So now we come back to our thing here, right? And I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. Okay, so what is actually pretest probability? So pretest probability, as I have said, it means that the number of people who are walking into the clinic with a disease or not. Okay, and the two ways we actually measure that, and the primary way is prevalence. Okay, and you see this bathtub, this is prevalence. Okay, the total disease people divided by the total number of people, or the entire population, that is the prevalence of the disease. Okay, and this is happening at a moment in time. Okay, so right now, what is the prevalence of a disease right now? Okay, that this is the prevalence. Okay, what is incidence? Incidence is the number of new cases, so the additional number of cases that is being added to the prevalence. Okay, you see this additional number of cases that is being added to the prevalence. So I'm not going to take the entire population. You understand? I'm not taking the entire population. I'm taking a certain group of people who are at risk. You see, that is what the denominator indicates here. So I'm taking the people at risk and the people who have, because of that risk, and the people who are having the disease now. That is incidence. Okay, and this is per unit of time. So basically, if I have 5 cases, right, five new cases in and the number of people was 50, right, number of people at risk was 50, so 1/10, so my incidence is 1/10. But that doesn't actually tell me. So the incidence rate is basically 1/10 in the time period I give you is, let's say, a year, right? So you have 5 new cases per year, and the number of people at risk in that year or something is about 50. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is you have 1/10 per year, right, or 0.1. So your incidence is 0.1 in per year. Okay, and they always try to confuse us with like this year and stuff. So try to look for some problems and go through the incidence and prevalence thing. Now, next thing we're looking at over here, right? You see the resemblance between this. So prevalence divided by 1 minus prevalence. So this is basically the odds, and I'm converting it into, no, so this is the odds and this is the ratio, right? So you see the rate indicates the odds, and I'm converting it into a ratio. Okay, so this will help you now. The reason I went through all the odds and the probability, this whole formula can easily make sense to you now, right? So the incidence rate, you see the rate over here, times the eventual like average duration of the disease. Okay, so let's say I have like an infectious disease, and the incidence rate is like um, five five per year or something. Okay. Oh no, that's too low. Let's say it's 5,000 per year. Okay. So the incidence rate of some infectious disease or something is 5,000 per year. Okay. And the average duration of the year is 10 years. Okay. Average duration of the disease. Sorry. Average duration of the disease is 10 years. So you have this contagious disease, right? And it lasts for like 10 years, right? In the body. So what did I say again? 5,000. The incidence rate is 5,000 cases per year times 10 years. So there will be around 50,000, right? 50,000 cases per year. No, total 50,000 cases, because the year and year will cancel out, right? So you understand now incidence rate per year. So you have divide by YR, right? Year here, and you put the year value over here as well, right? So 10 years. So year and year will cancel out. That's what I'm trying to say. And if you want to convert it to prevalence, you have to use this formula, right? Prevalence divided by 1 minus prevalence. So this represents the whole minus the prevalence, right? So I got the prevalence using my incidence, right? Now, what we have to remind ourselves is that the difference between prevalence and incidence depends on how close we're looking at the time period. Okay, so if the time period is very small, okay, let's say it was just for a couple of days or something, right? So if a disease is just for a few days of or 1 week or something, the amount of cases that are being generated at a time is almost equal to the prevalence of the disease. Okay, so you see, prevalence almost equals incidence for a short duration of disease. Okay, but prevalence is greater than incidence for chronic diseases. All right, so if a disease persists in the body for longer and longer and longer duration, I cannot equally uh, I cannot equate prevalence to incidence anymore. Okay, because incidence will start to give me the new cases, and prevalence will give me the existing cases and stuff like that. Okay, this should make sense now. So prevalence is the pre-test probability. Okay, and increasing the prevalence also increases the PPV, which should make sense to you now. If the disease has high prevalence, okay, if the disease has high prevalence, and if my if the disease is high prevalence, it should show higher positivity during testing, right? So it has high positive predictive value, right? So high prevalence, high positive predictive value. Okay, and high prevalence also means that you have low negative predictive value. Okay, so I wanted to show you this. PPV varies directly with pre-test probability. Baseline risks such as prevalence of disease. High pre-test probability means you have higher chances of getting the test as a positive test. That's all this statement means. And I'm covering all my ground in when it comes to all this, right? So now we understand incidence, prevalence, and pre-test probability in a way. They also ask us questions based on incidence and prevalence in terms of changing certain things and what decreases, what increases. So let's make intuitive sense of this, and then we go into the likelihood ratios and stuff. Okay. So if you increase the survival time, you increase the prevalence, which makes sense. I'm detecting more of the disease because people are surviving with the disease longer. Okay. Increased mortality is basically them dying. Okay, so if the disease is killing off everyone that has the disease, the overall prevalence will decrease, right? I'm not able to concretely detect even the presence of the disease anymore. Okay, so always try to visualize this thing. So you see how increasing survival time will basically, you see these two things. So I basically I'm keeping this constant, and what I'm doing here is either I'm not actually curing, but I'm just stopping the flow. So overall prevalence level will start to increase. Okay. What happens if I increase mortality? You see, you open up this drain and all the prevalence will leak out, basically. Okay, but we understand the intuition behind it as well. Faster recovery time. So if the recovery is faster and faster and faster, then obviously the incidence won't change, right? And the people who have the disease will eventually be cured, and like the prevalence will decrease. Okay, you see this here. Okay, extensive vaccine administration. Vaccine is um, like a preventative measure, so that will allow me to decrease the incidence as well. Okay, and if the incidence decreases, so does the prevalence. All right, decreasing risk factors. If the overall risk factors, let's say during COVID, if everyone started wearing like masks and stuff, so I'm trying to decrease the risk factor. Okay, that was like air-to-air transmission, right? So if I do that, I decrease the incidence and I decrease the prevalence. Okay, what are the other diseases that have like risk factors? Let's say using you know how you have like exposure. I'm trying to think of like certain exposures. The only thing that's coming to my mind right now is like, you know how you have hepatocellular carcinoma if you have like aflatoxin, or you're like eating mushrooms or nuts that contain aflatoxin and stuff. So if I decrease the availability of those mushrooms or nuts and stuff like that, I have decreased prevalence of hepatocellular carcinoma. Okay, just an example. Increase diagnostic sensitivity. Now if I increase the sensitivity, I'm casting a wider net, which is equaling to me increasing the incidence. Okay, I'll catch new cases easily. Thus, I'm increasing the prevalence. Okay, new effective treatment has started. So if the treatment has started, which phase of the prevention are you in? So you're not in the prevention at all. Now you're in the secondary phase. Now you have to treat the patient, right? So you can only treat and decrease the prevalence at a point. And all of this should make intuitive sense. Like, you're not supposed to remember each and everything, but you should remember how the answer came to be, how prevalence is decreasing, how incidence is increasing, or something. Decrease contact between infected and non-infected patients with airborne. Yeah, this is the example I gave you basically. So you see these two. Okay. Now, one thing I saw here. Yeah. So this was the reason I was going through pre-test probability and stuff like that. Okay. And before this, let me come back here. So I do my pre-test probability. I do some testing. Okay. And I receive my post-test probability. So this is the entire scenario how it could play out. Okay, I have high pre-test probability. I do my I take account of my likelihood ratios. I do the test. I receive high post-test probability. So this is like confirming what I assume, right? So if a set of individuals has a high pre-test value, the test goes well, and it detects that yeah, this person actually has the disease. I mean, whatever the test has concluded is correct. Okay, so you have high post-test probability as well. If the disease prevalence is low, the likelihood is low, and you know, eventually you see post-test being low. But the discrepancy happens between if the pre-test is low and the post-test is high, or pre-test is high and the post-test is low. So the problem is I need to quantify this. Okay, I'm just saying high and low, but I need to quantify it. And what actually happens is to basically convert this pre-test into a post-test, I have to multiply it by likelihood ratios. Okay, why am I multiplying this? Because this informs me about the status of the patient. Okay, so I take the pre-test, then I multiply it by likelihood ratio. This is related to the test. Okay, and now if I multiply that, I'm gonna get the odds for the post-test. Okay, all of this to understand likelihood ratios. Okay, now let's take a look at likelihood ratios. So what likelihood ratios are ratio of diseased patients with non-diseased patients. Okay, What we're trying to validate is the effectiveness of a like a test. Okay, so what I do is I compare the test with actual people who have the disease, all right, and actual people who don't have the disease. Okay, and then you see, you come back here, you see likelihood of positive result in disorder positive, right? So this is the sensitivity, and likelihood of positive result, that's why we subtracted this, in disorder negative, right? So disorder negative is specificity, and what is the likelihood of positive result is 1 minus the specificity. Okay, so this is the basic concept of likelihood ratio. Okay, so I'm taking the what is the likelihood of positive result in a disorder positive patient, and likelihood of positive result in a disorder negative patient. This is also equal to what they keep saying here, which is the total positive rate divided by the false positive rate. Now you understand this. Okay, and what this sneakily tried to get past us is this statement right here. Okay, so you see, as I said, you cannot convert odds into probability without changing their things, right? So what we do is we take the post-stat test odds, right? You come back here, you take the pre-test odds, and if you want the probability, you get the probability here, right? So if you have the probability, let's say you measure the prevalence or something, and you come up with pre-test probability, and you get the pre-test odds, right? You take the odds, put it in this thing, take the pre-test odds multiplied by the likelihood ratio. Now compare the values. So if the value of likelihood ratio is greater than 10, which means that most of the people that I'm encountering, right? Most of the people that I'm encountering, um, actually have the like they are like the likelihood is higher for them or having the disease based on this test. So this increases the value of LR. If it's greater than 10, increases the post test probability by 45%. Imagine that, right? So what we need is a test which, first of all, has good sensitivity and specificity. And how does that translate into a person like actually having the disease or not? It's through likelihood ratios, right? And this likelihood ratio will tell me a post test probability, which is in this term is increasing by 45%, right? If the likelihood ratio is increasing by 5, by a factor of 5, the post test probability is increasing by 30%. If the likelihood ratio is increasing by a factor of 2, the post test is increasing by 15%. If the likelihood ratio is just 1, right? The ratio, if it's the ratio is just 1, then you're not actually doing anything. So the post test probability will remain same, right? So you see how I've like stratified my results, and you see how this all of this makes sense now, right? Now pre-test was high, post-test was high, low, high, low. What is actually causing this high and low? First of all, that was the likelihood ratio. Second of all, the likelihood ratio also determines to what extent and level the my post-test probability will go up to or decrease, right? So this was positive likelihood ratio. Now, if I want to, you see the two sides of the coin are, either if it's positive, I try to rule in, right? If it's positive, I try to rule in, and if it's negative, I try to rule out. Okay, so these are the two sides of the coin. Now, similarly, how we did above. So you take the likelihood of negative result in a disorder positive patient. Okay, so what's the best way of getting a disorder positive? What's the best way of determining a disorder positive patient? It's through sensitivity, but I need the likelihood of negative result from him, right? So I take 1 minus sensitivity. All right. Then in the denominator, I take specificity, right? What am I trying to find through specificity is the likelihood of negative result in a disorder negative patient, right? So disorder negative and a negative result from them. That makes specificity. Come back here. You see again, negative likelihood ratio, you have 1 minus sensitivity divided by specificity. Probability of negative results in patient with disorder, probability of negative result in patient without disorder. Fn by Tn. Even if you don't remember that, try to remember this. If you solve for it, you can get it. It's okay. I don't think they give you like severe math questions and stuff, but make sense of this. All right. So now we understand negative stuff. And now see, you see how if the negative likelihood ratio decreases by less than 0.1%, so you have the post test probability decrease by 45%, right? So imagine, just through sheer maths we can determine how, um, if this person actually has a disease or not, right? And that's what we're trying to do, right? So 0.2 decrease by 30%, 0.5 decrease by 50%. We don't have to remember all this, but it always helps to understand. Okay. Now we have done all of this. Let's just take a look at the demographic stuff because it kind of gets missed out. So three types of population distributions. Okay. All of this depends on four factors. Okay. If the birth rate is increasing, you will see the bottom. Okay, so this is based on age and the basically the chronicle uh, chronological order. Okay, so if the birth rate is increasing, you have younger, the age population increasing, right? So you see birth rate increasing, younger age population increasing. Okay, if the birth rate is decreasing, you see eventually the similar set of like population individuals, right? So you have equal number of babies, you have equal number of adolescents, you have equal number of adults. So eventually this is like a stagnant type of population. Okay, this is a growing type of population, this is stable. Now declining is when you don't have enough birth rate, your adolescents are decreasing, your young population, your adults, they're all decreasing, and eventually the old population will decrease because they will eventually die, right? So birth rate is the main thing. If mortality rate is increasing, you see how the top of the pyramid is very sharp, that indicates mortality rate. If the mortality rate is low, you see how this is far wider than this, right? So birth rate indicates this, mortality rate indicates this. Or see, birth rate always will indicate the young population, but mortality can happen in any of these populations, right? It A young child can die, right, for due to something. Adolescent can die due to something. Adults can die due to something. So mortality rate not only indicates this, it indicates all of this. But if it's high, it means like the overall population will decrease, right? Mortality rate is low. So in this case, mortality rate is low, which means the population is surviving and stuff. And even in this, mortality rate is low. That means the population is surviving. Okay. Life expectancy short. Population is growing. So in this case, you have a growing population, but they're all dying. Okay. Um, Best example of this, I'm not going to give you any country or something, but I'm going to compare it to like a life cycle of an animal. Let's say it's a rat. Okay, so all the rat population, they breed fast, right? They breed fast, but they die early as well, right? That's what this indicates. A human population, most likely they don't breed as much, the breeding rate isn't high, but they don't die as quick as the rat, right? Okay, so they live longer, right? So this is what this indicates. And eventually, let's say a life cycle of an elephant, they breed low, right? Their birth rate is low, they live for long, right? And eventually, if they don't like survive or something happens, eventually they decline, even like pandas and stuff. Okay, this was this. What was the next thing? Test cutoffs. Yeah, so we've done sensitivity and specificity and stuff like that. Okay, what matters now is determining a right cutoff value for these tests and stuff. Okay, because you can imagine if I change the cutoff values, it will drastically affect the amount of population and the positive and negative results. Okay, and a lot of research goes into just determining these cutoff values. So you would remember like previously, like the cutoff value for hypertension was like 145 or 140 over 90 or something, but now they reduced it to like 130 over 80 or something, right? Don't quote me on the values, but that's just an example. Okay. So how do we determine which cutoff value will give us the best results? Okay, this is like an optimization problem. Okay, so how do I optimize? Either you will try to lower it, right? So if you found a balance or something and you try lowering the cutoff value, right? So what do you actually doing? You casting a wider net, right? You want to catch. You will catch all of the fishes. You will catch the yellow fish and the blue fish. Okay, that's what lowering will do, and this is the effect of lowering. So you go from point B to point A, right? I'm catching a lot of fishes now, right? All of these are going to be caught now, right? Previously I wasn't catching these. So if I was here, I was just catching these, right? So disease present and positive and stuff, right? So what actually increases? You see, total positive results will start to increase because I'm casting a wider net. I'll cast a lot of positive people, right? And eventually, what my test will do, it will start misidentifying my positives, right? So it will tell me some of the negatives are also positive, right? Because it's just a wider net. I'm catching all the yellow fishes, which in this case probably have the disease, and blue fishes which are healthy, but my test is telling me, you know what, let's catch them all. Okay. So what actually happens with sensitivity? You have the numerator increasing, right? And the denominator increasing, and this one is decreasing. Okay. So because this is decreasing, if the denominator decreases, the overall sensitivity will increase. Should make sense to you. Denominator decreases, sensitivity will increase. Okay. What's happening to the specificity? You see, true negative has decreased. So if the true negative, the numerator has decreased, that means specificity has decreased. Okay. What's happening here? True positive has increased and false positive has increased. The denominator has increased. You see, denominator has increased. So if denominator increases, PPV will decrease. Okay, make sense of that. If you want to look at the formula again, yeah. If this helps, okay. So if the denominator increases, you see how sensitivity and stuff like that. If the denominator increases here, the overall value will decrease. Okay. If the denominator increases here, the overall value will decrease, and vice versa. Okay, that's what we're doing. So PPV will decrease, right? And this you see right here. You will try to remember this a lot of times. I've done the same mistake. Don't try to remember them. Come up with them. They don't take as long once you have this down. Okay. I'm casting a wider net. I'm lowering the values. What am I increasing? I'm increasing the overall positive values. Okay. I'm catching the actual disease and the false disease. Okay. Right. And if false disease increases, what's gonna happen? I'm gonna decrease the PPV. Okay. And if I'm decreasing the true negative and I'm decreasing the false negative, this increases. Why? Because I've decreased the denominator here. Okay, more than the true negatives. Okay. So total, if you want to summarize and remember it, it's fine, but I suggest take a second, put it in your brain that you know what's increasing and what's decreasing. It'll help you visualize it better. Okay. So you see how the cutoff has moved here. Now speaking of visualization, visualize this using this part. Okay. So let's say I'm at B, and now let's say I draw imaginary line through here. Okay. So what have I just increased? I've increased my total positive area, right? I'm here, right? I'm right here. So you see on towards the right of the cursor, you'll see the entire total positive area is increased, right? And I've shrunk my false negative. I've increased my overall false positive, right? And I've decreased my true negative. So these two peaks and this demarcation will help you visualize and figure out what's actually happening. Okay. Now raising the cutoff value, I'm casting a smaller net, right? I'm casting a smaller net, and I will catch a small amount of only yellow fish, the only fish I actually want. Okay. So raising the cutoff value will increase what? Um, this should say increase specificity, by the way. You see? So raising the cutoff value will increase the specificity. Okay. So I'm decreasing my sensitivity. I'm increasing my specificity. Okay. Right here. Um, Increasing my specificity and decreasing my sensitivity. And what am I doing? I'm increasing my PPV and I'm decreasing my NPV. Just making sure. Yeah, increasing my PV and decreasing my NPV. Okay. How am I doing that? You see this value TP divided by TP by FP, right? PPV is equal to that. So I'm decreasing the denominator here, so this increases. Okay, and you just work it out mentally for take a second and just work it out. It'll help you remember it. Okay, how do you get optimal results? Now you can sit there and try to compare for each and every value. Go over and over in a loop and try to change the cutoff value, determine the PPV, NPV or something, right? Change the cutoff value, get a set of these values, and then try to figure out what happens. What's the easiest way to do it? Draw a curve, right? How does one thing change with respect to another thing? What are the two things that I'm talking about? Make a graph between the rate of total positive and the rate of false positive. Well, we did it with like likelihood ratios and stuff, right? So you take sensitivity on the y-axis. I've seen questions which they like try to confuse us which axis is what. Okay, sensitivity on the y-axis and 1 minus specificity on this axis. So basically the formula for likelihood ratio, right? And this is called the receiver operating characteristic, this ROC curve. Okay, so this curve is helping us determine what the cutoff value actually is. So we're not actually sitting there and doing all this math and just wasting our time, right? So you see, if the change, if there was the total positive change and the FP change was equal, right? So what am I measuring? The cutoff value hasn't actually done anything for me. It's the same, right? So the TP rate and the FP rate is the same, right? But as the test and the cutoff value reaches optimal values, right? The overall total positive will be far increased compared to the FP rate. You see, FP rate is like right here, and I'm getting nearly one value, right? Nearly, I'm in the 90s, and if I just increase a tiny bit, I reach one, right? So this is the ideal test where just the smallest increase in the false positive will increase my total positive. Okay, and that's the best value to be at. So what I want, ideally, what I want is whoever I'm getting in, whoever I'm testing positive in, should are the only ones who have the disease. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So whoever who tests positive have the disease. So my test is 100 on 100. It's the best test I've ever made, right? Doesn't happen like that. Obviously, it can't happen like that. Okay. Reality is that it's usually between this 0.5, which means that there is no predictive value, and 1. Okay, so a test with a good curve will be closer to the 1. Okay, which just means that you have low FP values compared to the TP values. You see how high I am right here. Okay, so the better test, performing test will have a higher area under the curve, with the curve closer to the upper left corner. Okay, now yeah, so you see, best at it has the high TP rate. Okay, so the overall rate for getting total positive or the sensitivity is high in this one. But if it's just diagonal, going through the center, it sucks, as there is no difference. Okay, so now you understand the ROC curve and stuff as well. So we've done our testing. We've come up with our likelihood ratios, pre-test probability, sensitivity, this and that, and we've made sure that whatever test we're running is good. But how like, is it accurate to what we actually want, right? And how often does it actually work, right? Does it work in different settings, and how often it actually works, right? So Accuracy means validity, which means how close to the true value are we actually. Okay, so this is what accuracy represents. All right, and it should make sense to you. How closer are you to the center of the dartboard? And that's what they try to represent in first aid as well. Okay, precision is also known as reliability. So how often is it close? So I can be close 1 out of 10 times, which is not precise at all, or I can be close 10 out of 10 times. Okay, so that's what accuracy and precision represent. Okay, accuracy. So there are 4 possible scenarios which occur. Again, I've tried to break it down as easily as possible. Accuracy is high, precision is high. This is the best possible outcome. Okay, so any test which has high accuracy, I can trust it. But can I trust it all the time? If the precision is high, great. Accuracy is low, but the precision is high. So I'm not close to the center. I'm off center, but I'm grouped together. Okay, so what does it mean? Together but away from the center. Okay, right? Low and high. Accuracy is high. Okay, but the precision is low. So I am around the center, but I am scattered all over the place. Okay, so high and low, apart but at the center. Okay, and low, you just suck. Might not use it at all. Okay, so now we understand all of that. Now we'll continue the risk and ratios and stuff in the next part.